I didn't sleep after the subway. How could I? Even when I closed my eyes, I still heard the roar of the phantom train, still felt the cold breath against my ear when the lights went out, still tasted blood from biting my tongue as I counted to 30. But worst of all, I still heard the intercom, that calm, detached voice cutting through the static like a scalpel. Subject MB resists memory suppression. Continue exposure. Those words followed me into daylight. I couldn't shake them. Subject MB, my initials, my name stripped of humanity, turned into a code. I kept asking myself what it meant. Was I a guard, a test subject, both? And if the subway wasn't just haunted but something else, some kind of experiment, then who was running it? And why me? I tried to stay in my apartment, tried to bury myself under blankets and pretend none of it was real. But the silence inside the walls wasn't safe anymore. Every creak of the floorboards, every drip from the pipes, felt like the tunnels breathing through the building. I swear I heard faint whistling once, even though I hadn't whistled again since that night. It was enough to send me scrambling out the door, desperate for noise, for life, for anything that felt real. That's when I found the flyer. It wasn't in my mailbox. It wasn't even slipped under my door. It was just there, sitting on the counter in my kitchen. I hadn't put it there. I know I hadn't. The paper was thin, cheap with faded print. At the top, in big block letters, Night Manager Wanted, whispering Pines Motel, cash paid nightly. I froze with it in my hands. Another night job, another place no one in their right mind would want. I thought of tearing it up, throwing it out, but my fingers wouldn't move. The words seemed to hum against my skin like they were meant for me. By evening, I was driving. I don't remember deciding to. I just remember the road stretching out in front of me, the rain-slick asphalt reflecting dull headlights, and the flyer crumpled on the passenger seat. My chest was tight, my stomach knotted, but something deeper than fear pushed me forward. Desperation, maybe. Or something worse. Inevitability. The Whispering Pines Motel stood alone on a stretch of highway nobody used anymore. Its neon sign sputtered weakly, half the letters burnt out, so it only read, Whisper, S-Mo-L. The building sagged under its own weight, paint peeling from the walls, windows dark and lifeless. The parking lot was a graveyard of oil stains, empty except for my car. I sat in the driver's seat for a long time, staring at the sign flickering against the rain. The subway had nearly broken me. And yet here I was, about to walk into another cage. I told myself I could leave, that I still had the choice. But deep down, I knew better. Whatever had started in those tunnels, it wasn't finished. The office door creaked when I pushed it open. The lobby smelled of stale cigarettes and mildew. The carpet was threadbare, the wallpaper bubbled with moisture. Behind the desk sat a man who looked like he'd been waiting decades for me to arrive. He was old, gaunt, his skin stretched too tight over his bones. His eyes bulged slightly, wet and unblinking, and when they fixed on me, I felt pinned in place like an insect. "You're here for the job," he said. It wasn't a question. His voice rasped like dry leaves. I nodded, though my throat was too tight for words. Without another word, he slid a folded piece of paper across the desk. His fingers were long, yellowed at the nails, trembling just slightly as he let go. "Read this," he said. My stomach turned to stone. I already knew what it would be before I touched it. The paper was creased, stained, the ink faded in places. I opened it slowly, hands trembling. 6 lines stared back at me. 6 rules. My breath caught in my chest. The subway had 7. The motel had 6. And the handwriting, the jagged, uneven scrawl, was the same. I looked up at the old man, my mouth dry. "Who wrote these?" I asked. His eyes never blinked. "Follow them," he whispered, "or you won't last." The words hit me like a curse. The same words Keller had said before. The same warning, recycled, reloaded, aimed directly at me again. I folded the paper and slipped it into my jacket. My fingers shook as I did it, not just from fear, but from recognition. Because this wasn't random. This wasn't a coincidence. The subway and the motel were connected. The rules weren't just rules. They were part of something larger, something watching me, something testing me. I glanced at the old man again, but he was already looking away, his gaze lost somewhere in the flickering light above the desk, as if I was already forgotten, as if I'd already been replaced. I stepped back into the rain, staring at the neon sign stuttering against the night. 6 rules, 6 new chances to die, and the same sinking feeling in my gut. I wasn't working these jobs, I was surviving them, and maybe that was the point all along. The paper felt damp in my hands, though I knew it wasn't wet. My palms were sweating, my fingers trembling, and still I couldn't bring myself to let it go. 6 lines of jagged handwriting stared back at me, each one carrying the weight of a noose tightening around my throat. The first line was simple, almost mundane, but the way it was written made my skin crawl. Rule 1. Turn off the neon sign at 11:15 sharp. If it's still glowing after that, it will draw them in. I looked out the window at the sputtering sign, the few surviving tubes buzzing weakly, trying and failing to form the words. Whispering Pines Motel. Half the letters were gone, leaving broken fragments that meant nothing. But now, after reading that rule, it didn't feel broken. It felt deliberate, like a trap waiting to be sprung. Draw them in. Them. Whoever or whatever that was. I tried to imagine what the highway looked like at night, cars passing, the neon buzzing like a beacon. Who else would see it? People? Or something older, hungrier, crawling out of the dark the moment it saw the light? I forced my eyes back to the paper. Rule 2. If you hear knocking at any door after midnight, do not open it. Ignore it completely. A chill crept down my spine. The doors of the motel stood like soldiers along the balcony, identical, silent, waiting. The idea of someone knocking wasn't strange. What was strange was the certainty in the rule. Do not open it. Ignore it completely. Not be cautious, not check the peephole, just ignore it, as though whatever was outside would use any reaction, any acknowledgement, to wedge its way in. I thought of the subway tunnels, the voices calling my name, bending familiar sounds to lure me. This wasn't different. This was the same trap, rewritten. I swallowed hard and read the third. Rule 3. If you see a little girl in a white dress wandering the hallway, do not speak to her. She is not a guest. My throat tightened. The handwriting seemed shakier here, as if the writer's hand had been trembling harder than before. A little girl. A white dress. Something so ordinary, so disarming, that the instinct to speak would be overwhelming. The subway had used my mother's voice. The motel would use a child's face. Whoever or whatever was behind this knew exactly how to dig into the softest parts of a person's mind. I imagined her already, standing in the hallway just beyond the door, hair hiding her face, dress dragging across the carpet. Would she knock? Would she whisper? Would she cry? The rule was clear. She was not a guest. Whatever she was, she wore the mask of something harmless. But the truth was anything but. I rubbed my eyes, but the words blurred more the longer I looked. I forced myself to keep going. Rule 4. Room 6 must remain locked at all times. Do not attempt to enter. Do not allow anyone else inside. My breath hitched. Room 6. My thoughts snapped instantly back to line 6. The number followed me now, branded into everything. I glanced at the key hooks behind the front desk, each little brass peg holding a tarnished tag, 1 through 12, except for 6. That hook was bare, like it had never been there at all. But the paper made it clear. The room existed. It just wasn't meant to be touched. I leaned closer, scanning the desk, the walls, looking for any sign of it. A chill prickled at the back of my neck. The rules weren't warnings anymore. They were lures, baiting me to test them, daring me to fail. Rule 5. If the phone at the front desk rings after midnight, do not answer it, no matter how long it rings. The phone sat inches from me, a beige relic stained by years of nicotine, its cord curled like a withered snake, coiled tight but ready to spring. stared at it, and in my mind, I already heard it ringing, shrill, endless, cutting through silence like a blade. The rule didn't just forbid picking it up, it forbade listening at all, no matter how long it rings, which meant it wouldn't stop. It would keep ringing, testing me, until I broke. I touched the receiver with one finger. The plastic was cold, too cold. I snatched my hand back before I could think about it. Finally, my eyes landed on the last line. Rule 6. Leave at sunrise. Do not linger on the property after dawn. Do not look back as you go. This one was worse than the others. The subway had rules about surviving the night, but none about morning. Morning was supposed to be safe, but not here. Here, dawn was another threshold, another danger. Do not look back. The words made my stomach knot. What would I see if I did? The motel burning? The people who came before me, still trapped inside? Or something else wearing my face, waving me back in? My head pounded as I folded the paper and slipped it into my jacket. The rules weren't just instructions anymore. They were scripture. And I was the unwilling prophet forced to carry them. When I raised my eyes, the old man behind the desk hadn't moved. He sat slouched in his chair, eyes wide, unblinking, fixed somewhere just above my head. His lips parted slightly as if he wanted to speak, but couldn't, or wouldn't. Finally, after a long silence, he whispered, "Follow them, or you won't last." The exact same words Keller had said, the same flat tone, the same prophecy of death disguised as guidance. My chest tightened. My pulse hammered in my ears. I wanted to scream at him, demand to know who wrote the rules, why they were the same, why I was the one chosen to bear them. But his eyes had already glazed over, slipping past me, as though I'd already ceased to exist. I backed out of the office slowly, the neon buzz outside louder now, its glow bleeding against the damp night. The rules pulsed in my pocket with every step I took, beating in rhythm with my heart. 6 rules, 6 traps, 6 new ways to die. And behind each one, the same question echoed in my mind. If these rules weren't meant to protect me, then what were they really measuring? The first night at Whispering Pines Motel felt wrong before it even began. The moment I stepped out of my car, the air clung to me like wet cloth, heavy and sour, as though the building itself was exhaling. The neon sign buzzed above me, struggling to stay alive, its half-dead tubes sputtering between crimson and pale green. I checked my watch. 11:02. 13 minutes before the first rule mattered. Inside the office, the old man had vanished. No sound of shuffling footsteps, no coughs, no creak of his chair. Just silence, broken only by the faint hum of the lobby's fluorescent light. I sat behind the desk, the rules folded in my jacket pocket, and tried not to think about the subway. Tried not to think about the phantom train screaming through a tunnel that wasn't supposed to exist, or the notebook that said, "We are subjects." But silence never stays still for long. In places like this, it waits, shifts, sharpens. At 11:10, the neon outside began to buzz louder. I swear the glow pulsed in time with my heartbeat, brightening and dimming like something alive. I kept glancing at the clock on the wall, the seconds dragging, every tick loud enough to rattle in my chest. My throat tightened. Rule 1. Turn off the neon sign at 11:15 sharp. If it's still glowing after that, it will draw them in. Draw who? My hand kept straying toward the light switch behind the desk, hovering but never touching. 11:14. The sign flickered violently, casting long shadows across the lobby. The buzz rose to a shrill whine. For a moment I thought it might explode. At exactly 11:15, I flipped the switch. The hum cut off instantly. The glow outside died, plunging the parking lot into darkness. I exhaled, relief flooding me, until I realized the darkness wasn't empty. For the briefest second, as the last trace of neon faded, I saw it. A figure standing by the far edge of the lot, tall, thin, too still, watching, and then it was gone. My skin prickled as I slumped back into the chair, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. The rules didn't say what would happen if the sign stayed on, only that they would come. Maybe I'd just seen the edge of a tree. Maybe my brain was playing tricks. But deep down, I knew better. The clock hands crawled toward midnight. I told myself the worst was over, that maybe Rule 1 had been the only test for tonight. But at 12:03, the first knock came. 3 sharp raps against a door down the hallway. I froze. The sound was clean, precise, too real to dismiss. My head turned before I could stop it, my eyes fixing on the row of doors stretching into the dark. Room 4, maybe, or 5th. I couldn't be sure. The knock came again, louder this time. Rule 2. If you hear knocking at any door after midnight, do not open it. Ignore it completely. I gripped the arms of the chair until my knuckles burned. Every instinct screamed to move, to check, to at least look through the dusty glass of the office window. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't shake the thought. What if it was a stranded traveler? What if someone needed help? Then, faintly, a voice followed the knock. "Please, it's so cold, just let me in." I swallowed hard. The words were muffled, warped by the thin walls, but the tone was pleading. Human. My chest ached with the urge to respond. But I remembered the subway, the voice that had warned my mother's tone. The rule here didn't say, "Be careful." It said, "Ignore it completely." I stayed still, silent. The knocking grew frantic, fist pounding against wood. "Please, please, I can't breathe out here." My body shook with every blow. I pressed my palms to my ears, teeth grinding together, forcing myself not to move. The sound echoed down the hall, each thud vibrating in my chest. My vision blurred. I nearly broke. And then, just as suddenly, as it began, it stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the knocking. Heavy. Final. Like the motel had swallowed the sound whole. I lowered my hands slowly, breath ragged, ears ringing with the ghost of what I'd heard. But silence didn't last. A new sound crept in, faint but unmistakable. The sound of footsteps. Soft, deliberate padding slowly past the row of rooms, one door at a time. Closer, closer. I couldn't see the hallway from the desk, but I didn't need to. I felt the footsteps, each one pressing against my chest, against my skull. They stopped just outside the office door. I held my breath. The knob rattled. I squeezed my eyes shut, whispering the rule under my breath like a prayer. Ignore it completely. Ignore it completely. The knob rattled harder, twisting, jerking against the lock. My heart pounded so violently I thought the whole motel could hear it. And then, silence again. When I finally dared to open my eyes, the office was empty. The clock ticked past 12:20. The phone sat silent. The neon remained dark. I leaned back in the chair, my body trembling, sweat dripping down my spine despite the chill. My first night at Whispering Pines wasn't over, but I'd survived the first 2 rules. Barely. And as I sat there, trying to steady my breath, one thought cut through the haze of fear. The knocking hadn't been random. It had been testing me, the same way the subway had tested me. And if this was a test, then someone, somewhere, was watching. The second night didn't wait to terrify me. It began the moment I set foot in the lobby. The place was too quiet. Not the quiet of peace, but the heavy, waiting silence I'd felt in the subway tunnels. It was the kind of silence that knew me by name, that breathed with me, that wanted me to forget what safety even sounded like. The neon sign outside had already been turned off at 11:15. I hadn't waited until the last second this time. I stood in the rain and flipped the switch early, my hand trembling, terrified of what might appear in the parking lot if I hesitated again. When the buzzing died, the motel seemed to exhale, but the relief didn't last. By the time I sat behind the desk, flashlight across my lap, the silence had begun to thicken, curling around me like smoke. For almost an hour, nothing happened. I tried to steady myself, to believe maybe the first night had been the worst. The knock on the door, the voice begging to be let in. I told myself it couldn't get worse than that. The air vent rattled occasionally. Water dripped somewhere deep in the walls. Those sounds almost comforted me. At least they belonged to something real. But at 12:07, the comfort ended. The hallway light flickered once, humming weakly as the bulb stuttered, and in that flicker, I saw her. She was standing at the far end of the corridor, motionless, small against the glow. A little girl, 8, maybe 10. Her white dress hung loose, its hem frayed, stained with something dark at the bottom as it brushed across the carpet. Her hair was long and black, spilling forward to cover her face completely. Rule 3 came crashing back into my head. If you see a little girl in a white dress wandering the hallway, do not speak to her. She is not a guest. My body locked. I couldn't look away. She didn't move at first, didn't even shift her weight. She stood too still, the kind of stillness no living child could manage. Then, she tilted her head slightly to the side. The hair shifted just enough to reveal the curve of one cheek. Pale, too pale. My stomach lurched. A sound followed, soft, delicate, so out of place it made my blood run cold. A giggle, high-pitched, childlike, the sound of innocence twisted into mockery. It floated down the hallway, bouncing unnaturally, as if the walls themselves were playing it back to me. I pressed my palms flat against the desk, nails digging into the wood. Every nerve screamed to speak, to ask her name, to ask if she was lost. But the rule repeated in my mind like a warning siren. Do not speak to her. She is not a guest. She took a step forward, then another. The carpet muffled her movements, but I could hear her anyway. The faint drag of her dress, the soft whisper of bare feet against fabric. Her head tilted more, the curtain of hair swaying. The giggle came again, louder now, stretched too long, bending into something that no longer sounded human. Then she spoke. Michael, my heart stopped. The subway had used my mother's voice. The motel had chosen a child's. Different masks, same trap. My hands shook violently. My lips pressed shut so hard I thought they might tear. Michael, come play with me. The words crawled under my skin, cold and sticky. She was closer now, halfway down the hall, the overhead light flickering again, as if her presence was draining the power itself. My flashlight trembled in my grip. I thought of shining it at her, but some part of me knew the light might make things worse. I forced my eyes down to the paper in my pocket. The rules, my lifeline, my only anchor. Don't speak, don't acknowledge, don't break. But silence didn't save me. She kept coming, step by step. The hem of her dress brushed the doors as she passed, and I swear each knob rattled as if something inside wanted out. My breath caught in my throat. She stopped at room 6, the door with no key. The door the rules said must never open. Her small hand rose, pale against the dark wood, and rested on the knob. Slowly, her head lifted. The hair parted just enough for me to see. Her mouth. She was smiling, too wide, the corners of her lips tearing upward into her cheeks, exposing teeth that weren't teeth at all, but jagged shards, uneven, crammed into her gums like broken glass shoved into soft clay. My body moved before my brain did. I yanked the flashlight up, the beam slicing through the dark. For a split second, it caught her face full on. I'll never forget what I saw. Her skin wasn't just pale, it was stretched thin, sagging in places like wax melted and hardened again. Her eyes weren't eyes, they were pits, black, hollow, but alive with movement. Something wriggled inside them. Her mouth split wider, wider, until it looked like her head would tear in two. And then she was gone. The light stuttered. The hallway was empty again. Room 6's door stood shut. The silence returned, heavy and unbroken, as if she had never been there at all. I sank back into the chair, chest heaving, hands trembling so violently the flashlight nearly fell from my grip. I pressed both palms against my face, trying to block out the image burned into my vision. And that's when I heard it. The giggle. Software right behind me. I spun, beam flashing across the lobby, every shadow leaping into monstrous shapes, but the room was empty. Just the silent desk, the silent phone, the window streaked with rain. I stayed frozen, the flashlight trembling in my hand, until the sound faded into nothing. I knew then that the rules weren't just warnings. They were promises. The girl wasn't a ghost or a child. She was part of the test, Another mask, another trap, another stage in whatever this was. And worst of all, I knew she wasn't finished with me yet. The third night at Whispering Pines Motel began with a weight in my chest heavier than any silence the place had given me before. The rules were burned into me by now. I didn't need the paper in my pocket to remember them. I could hear them whispered in the back of my skull every second. Turn off the neon. Don't open the door. Don't speak to the girl. Room 6 stays locked. Don't answer the phone. Leave at dawn. Simple words, but each one felt like it had claws, hooking deeper into me with every hour I spent here. At 12:31, the silence shattered. The phone rang. The sound was sharp, shrill, so loud in the dead lobby it made me flinch, as if someone had fired a gun. The beige plastic receiver rattled against its cradle, the cord twitching like a snake. My blood ran cold. Rule 5. If the phone at the front desk rings after midnight, do not answer it, no matter how long it rings. I froze. My hands gripped the edge of the desk so tightly my knuckles turned white. The phone rang again, and again, and again, each burst cutting through the stillness, clawing into my ears. My pulse pounded with it, faster, harder, until it felt like the ringing and my heartbeat were syncing together, one unbearable rhythm. I tried to ignore it. I told myself the rule was absolute. Don't answer. I shoved my chair back, standing, pacing the room with my hands pressed over my ears. But it didn't help. The sound wasn't just outside anymore. It was inside. I could feel it vibrating in my skull, a shrill metallic cry that made my teeth ache. The longer it rang, the stranger it became. The tone bent, warping between bursts of silence, like a voice was hiding inside the noise. And then I heard it, a whisper threaded through the ringing, curling into my thoughts. Pick it up. I shook my head violently. No, I muttered aloud. No, I won't. But the whisper grew clearer, sharper, like it was bypassing sound entirely and speaking directly into my brain. Pick it up. You already know it's for you. Answer. Michael. Answer. My breath caught. My name. It knew my name. The subway had known it too. The girl in white had said it in a child's voice. But this wasn't either of them. This was something colder, more patient. The phone rattled harder, the whole desk shaking under its force. The shrill ring split the air, steady and merciless, and I couldn't take it anymore. My hand shot out before I could stop myself. I grabbed the receiver. The ringing stopped. Silence pressed against me so heavy it hurt my ears. I raised the phone slowly to my ear, trembling, my throat dry as bone. And then the voice came. Subject MB, exposure increasing, proceed to next stage. The words were flat, mechanical, spoken with the precision of a machine, but underneath, layered faintly, was something else, something disturbingly familiar. My own voice. I staggered back, nearly dropping the receiver. What? I whispered before I could stop myself. The line hissed, crackled, static surged, then the voice returned, overlapping itself, fractured, like multiple mouths speaking in unison. You will comply, you will adapt, resistance noted, subject integrity unstable. Behind the words, a sound emerged. At first I thought it was more static, but then it twisted into a laugh. High, childlike, sharp. The girl. Her giggle threaded through the line like a splinter, and then, beneath her laughter, came another sound, the roar of a train. That impossible scream of metal on tracks, echoing through a tunnel that wasn't here, but somehow bled through anyway. My breath came in ragged gasps. My grip on the receiver tightened until the plastic creaked. What do you want from me? The words slipped out, weak, desperate. The static swallowed the line for a moment. Then, in perfect clarity, the answer came. You already know. The lights above flickered violently, buzzing so loud the fixtures rattled. Shadows leapt across the walls, stretching, bending. The air turned heavy, damp, pressing into my lungs like water. The phone hissed, shrieked, then shifted, until it was my own voice whispering back at me. Michael, come inside. My knees buckled. The receiver slipped from my hand, dangling by its cord, swinging gently as static spilled out in waves. My own voice repeated, broken and jagged. "Michael, come inside. Michael, come inside." And then I heard the click. Down the hallway, a door opened. I turned slowly, dread sinking claws into my spine. Room 6, the door that was never supposed to open. It stood ajar now, just a crack, just enough for blackness to bleed through like ink poured across the carpet. The shadows writhed, alive, stretching farther, reaching across the hall. Something was inside that room. I couldn't see it clearly, only its shape, a hunched figure, thin and angular, shoulders sharp as blades, head bowed forward unnaturally. It sat perfectly still, facing away, but I could hear it, breathing, low, ragged, wet like air dragging through a throat that wasn't built to breathe. The phone crackled behind me, my own voice spilling from the receiver in a fractured chant. "Michael, come inside. Michael, come inside." The shadows reached my feet, cold, alive. My stomach lurched. I forced my legs to move, stumbling backward, eyes locked on that sliver of darkness. The figure twitched, just a small movement, but enough to snap every nerve in my body like a live wire. And then, slowly, its head turned. Not fully, not yet. Just enough for me to glimpse the edge of its face in the gap of the door. Skin pale and sagging, mouth too wide, a mirror of the girl's terrible smile. But it wasn't hers. It was mine. My own face, twisted, half hidden in shadow, grinning back at me from inside room 6. The phone shrieked one last time, then went dead. The light steadied, the shadows froze, and the door clicked shut. Silence swallowed everything. I stood in the middle of the lobby, shaking so violently I thought my bones might rattle apart. My own voice still echoed in my skull, repeating the same phrase over and over. "Michael, come inside." I'd broken a rule, and now I knew what waited for me if I broke another. Not ghosts, not demons, something worse, me. I didn't sleep when I left the motel that night. My body made it back to my apartment, but my mind stayed behind, trapped in the crack of room 6, replaying the image of that hunched figure with my own face staring out from the shadows. I couldn't stop thinking about the phone either, the way it had spoken in layers, machine and human, stranger and familiar, all woven together like a chorus that had been rehearsed for me alone. Even when I closed my eyes, the static still hummed in my ears, faint but insistent, as if the line hadn't been severed when I slammed the receiver down. Morning light did nothing to wash away the stain. Pixel patted across the couch and curled against me, purring faintly, but even her warmth didn't anchor me the way it used to. Every reflection I caught in the apartment, on the window, in the kitchen sink, even in the black glass of the television, looked back at me too long, as if checking whether I was still me or if the motel had already switched me out for the version that belonged in room 6. The rules weren't just following me into daylight, they were rewriting me, carving themselves into the marrow of my thoughts. I tried to tell myself I wouldn't go back. No job, no paycheck, no desperation was worth hearing my own voice chant my name through a dead phone line. But by afternoon, I found myself holding the crumpled rule sheet again, smoothing it flat, my eyes tracing the words as if they were scripture. I didn't choose to read it, the words chose me. And that's when I noticed something I hadn't before. On the back of the sheet, faint as though pressed there by accident, was another line of text. Check the drawer. The motel's desk drawer had been locked every night, sealed tight like everything else in that cursed place, but now I couldn't stop wondering if it had been meant for me all along. The paper crinkled in my hands, and I realized I was gripping it too tightly, as if it might vanish before I could decide what to do. By dusk, my body had already betrayed me. I was back at Whispering Pines. The neon buzzed faintly before I cut its power at exactly 11:15, my hands trembling but practiced. The night was colder than before, the rain heavier, pooling across the empty lot in black puddles that reflected the broken sign like fractured warnings. I slipped inside, flashlight tucked against my chest, and moved straight to the desk. My pulse pounded as I pulled at the drawer. This time it opened. Inside was a single object. A photograph. It was black and white, old, curled at the edges as if it had been carried for decades. I held it under the beam of the flashlight, my hands shaking, my stomach lurching before my eyes had even fully understood what I was seeing. The photo showed the lobby. The same desk, the same rotary phone, the neon sign burning through the window behind it. But in the chair, my chair, sat someone I knew too well. Me. Not just me as I am now, me exactly as I had looked the night before. Same jacket, same hollowed expression, same flashlight clutched across my lap. My mouth hung open in the photo, mid-breath, eyes wide, locked onto something beyond the frame. I could almost hear what I'd been staring at. The crack of room 6. I flipped the photo over with trembling hands. On the back, scrawled in faded ink, was a line that made my knees buckle. Subject MB, cycle 47, memory suppression unstable. The beam of the flashlight wavered across the desk. My breath hitched so violently it hurt. This wasn't just a haunting. It wasn't just rules. It was repetition, experimentation, and I wasn't the first. The phone rang. The sound slammed through the lobby, more violent than ever, a shriek that made my teeth ache. I dropped the photo and clutched the edge of the desk, every instinct screaming at me not to touch the receiver again. But I could already hear the static rising even before I moved. It wasn't waiting for me to answer this time. It was pouring out through the wires on its own. The photo fluttered against the floor in the draft from the hallway, face up, my own eyes staring at me from another night, another cycle. And layered under the static, clear as glass, a voice cut through. "You're remembering." The lights overhead flickered violently. The door to room 6 groaned. The shadows bled across the floor like a tide, faster this time, as if the motel had grown impatient with the pace of my compliance. Pixel's meow echoed in my head, though she wasn't here. My mother's voice whispered my name. The girl's giggle threaded through the static, and under it all, like a heartbeat too deep to ignore, was the truth I'd been circling since the subway. None of this had started here. It had started long before, and they were making sure I'd never escape the memory of it again. The phone shrieked, the shadows reached my shoes. The last thing I saw before the lights died was the photograph on the floor, my own face staring up, grinning this time.